Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by PowerFleet. So, tender volumes throughout the country. We've recovered out of our troughing that we normally see with our 7-day moving average here with the outbound tender volume index. We've recovered about 1% ahead of schedule from last year. So this is a pretty good sign, but at the same time in December you see we had about a 5 to 6% deviation from the previous year, but that was to the positive side. We're about 1% up so far this year. So that's a pretty decent side, but we are losing some momentum as we pull throughout January. This isn't necessarily unexpected because a lot of the volumes in January last year were driven by a lot of that tariff freight pull forward, the West Coast volumes, etc. So, you know, LA, we talked about that yesterday. Los Angeles volumes are significantly down year over year as a lot of that freight has already entered the space, and we're not seeing the same amount of activity on the maritime side versus last year. We're roughly about 16% down in terms of inbound maritime shipments year over year thus far. So let's check out the rest of the country and see what we're doing in terms of capacity throughout. So we've got our weighted rejection index map right behind me, combined with the outbound tender market share underneath it. So the taller the market, the more volume is present in that area. The redder the market, the looser the conditions are becoming in that market. The blue indicates tightening conditions. So up here around Detroit, we're starting to see some weekly tightness come up. We talked about the Louisville market yesterday. Along this little corridor right here, we're still seeing a little bit of intermittent tightness. But let's look at the rest of the country because I want to focus on, we've mentioned the Midwest and the Western Plain states over the last couple of days as being some of the tighter areas. Well, you look up here, here's the Omaha market. You don't really think about this area when you're a carrier because there's just not a lot of freight happening except for around very isolated areas throughout the plains. It's been consistently tight, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute in terms of long-running trend lines. So, and also the Phoenix market, the nation's backhaul next to Miami, of course, starting to show a little bit of tightness. Now, it doesn't mean that there's going to be an explosion of spot rate activity. Rates aren't going to go through the roof in Phoenix all of a sudden, but it does mean that versus last week, we are getting a little bit tighter. So let's dive on into the Omaha market. Omaha, Nebraska. So last year at this time, we're looking at tender rejection rates pretty high, pretty elevated, but we've calmed down. We've come out of 2018. It's not as relevant as it was before. But if you look at the blue line here, tender rejection rates have been increasing steadily throughout the months of August through December. And that has increased roughly from about 8% tender rejection rate to 24% during that time period. So this is an increasingly tight area, so rates should be going up. There should be a little bit more load availability in these markets, and you see that green line also. So volumes are driving this side, this demand side. So Omaha is becoming a lot better market for carriers to enter over the last 6 months or so. So something to note moving forward, because Omaha, again, not necessarily the easiest market to operate out of. Let's look at the Phoenix market real quickly here. Phoenix, Arizona over here. All the rejection rates except for your local rejection rates are going up out of this market over the last several days. So especially the mid-haul. So your mid-haul is going to be stuff that's moving around the Los Angeles market into that area, Flagstaff, etc. You're going to want to make sure that you are covered going into those areas. So Phoenix, one of the nations, is the second largest backhaul market in the country, but it is becoming a little bit better market as we move into early 2020. So again, carriers, you can keep your rates a little bit higher coming out of the Phoenix market over the next couple of days. And that'll do it for today's Carrier Update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from PowerFleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with PowerFleet.